Most premature death is preventable, and the number one predictor is subjectively measured diet quality. There is no pill, no supplement, no vitamin that can do what optimizing your diet quality can do.
Dr. David Katz, a globally recognized authority on nutrition, preventative medicine, and public health. He's authored How to Eat All Your Food and Diet Questions Answered. What is the most under-discussed factor contributing to preventable chronic disease today?
Our major problem tends to be excess. Excess of total eating. Most people are on the seafood diet. They see food and they eat it. We eat way too much junk, masquerading as food. We eat way too many calories. We tend to overeat protein because everybody thinks more's got to be better.
What is good nutrition for the human body, and how do we adjust this?
Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. Wholesome foods direct from nature fill us up on many fewer calories than ultra-processed food. In fact, ultra-processed food is willfully engineered to maximize the number of calories it takes to feel full.
Taking GLP-1s. Are there some significant dangers down the road or immediate?
So many people have...
We are so close to a big win for the cows. The Fiscal Act will soon end the 80-year-old cow's milk mandate and pave the way for a fairer food system that honors choice for all kids. Millions of cows are producing milk that is being mandated onto lunch trays in schools across the nation. Along with the canned corn and soggy French fries, millions of unopened milk cartons are being tossed into giant trash bins when the cafeteria lunch bell sounds. And that is all about to change. Introducing the Justice Tour. This is an exciting new education initiative that will enlighten middle and high school students on how a dairy-free lifestyle supports health, compassion, and human performance. Policy change has merely paved the way for us. It will take dedication to drive real change. And that's why we're hitting the road in 2026. We plan to bring powerful, science-based education about health, performance, and dietary justice to school dietitians, district leaders, students, teachers, and parents nationwide. And your continued faith in us fuels our movement toward a future where every child can thrive without dairy and cows are spared unnecessary suffering. We want you to learn more about the Justice Tour and why we're taking this life-changing message on the road in a very cool, brand new VW ID bus. It's totally electric. Let's map a future where free choice for kids means freedom for cows. Go to switchforgood.org/justice-tour. We'll be sharing more details, but we want you to help us blast off in 2026 with this nationwide tour with a generous year-end donation. Help us build gratitude, help us build momentum, help us change the future for kids and cows. The power is in our hands. Go to switchforgood.org and make your generous year-end donation now.
Welcome, Switchies, to the Switch for Good podcast. We're so glad you're here, and we have an incredible guest. You're going to learn a lot. You might want to take out a notepad and a pencil, I might say, because there is going to be a plethora of info and truth bombs that are going to be dropped today. Let me intro our awesome guest. In a world where truth bends to profit and noise, it's easy to lose sight of what actually harms us and what could help us heal. Few voices cut through that confusion with more clarity and courage than Dr. David Katz, a globally recognized authority on nutrition, preventative medicine, and public health. He's authored, wait for it, 19 books, including the widely acclaimed How to Eat All Your Food and Diet Questions Answered. And that's appeared in the New York Times and Oprah Magazine, Good Morning America, all the shows. His work has shaped national conversations, it's influenced policy, and helped millions rethink the way we eat, live, and define health. Today, we're going to explore how our food system became so distorted, how perception has been clouded by deceptive messaging and marketing, and why reclaiming the narrative around real nourishment might be one of the most powerful acts of rebellion we have. So welcome to the show, Dr. Katz.
Wow, Dotsie. I mean, it's an honor to be with you, and Jason, great to be with you. I don't know which I love more, that intro. I'm just sorry my mom wasn't listening in, or Switchies, not to be confused with Swifties. But
True.
Wow, I like that too. Great stuff.
Good.
So good to be with you.
Good. Mom can listen to the episode, so it's not
maybe
lost.
Maybe she is listening.
Right. Exactly. So there's a lot that we want to dive into, as I mentioned before we came on live. But first question is kind of a broad one. I want to understand, in your view, what is the most under-discussed factor contributing to preventable chronic disease today? What are we not talking about that we should be?
Well, we're talking about it's hard to answer because we're talking about everything all the time, but so much of what we say is nonsense. So I could make the case that the single most important factor is diet quality, overall diet quality. And that would be an evidence-based case for the simple reason that when we look at massive epidemiologic undertakings like the Global Burden of Disease Study and ask, what are the factors that predict the greatest burden of premature death and chronic disease? Objectively measured diet quality tops that list, not just for the United States, but basically for all industrialized countries in the world. So we're not talking about diet in the right way. We're not talking about the fact that it's overall diet quality that matters most, that it's the single most impactful variable you can adjust in your life in the pursuit of more years in life, more life in years. But we are talking about diet all the time. Unfortunately, so much of what we have to say on the topic is propaganda and nonsense that, and I don't mean us, present company excluded, but, if you think about the community that's talking about diet, all the diet tribes and all of their diatribes on the topic, people wind up massively confused, and that disempowers people. So if we would settle on a couple of things. First, objectively measured overall diet quality is really what we should be looking at, not isolated nutrients. Second, this is the single leading predictor variable for years in life, life in years. And third, the fundamentals of eating well do not change every week on the morning shows. You look at the populations around the world that derive the greatest benefit from diet, they do it transgenerationally. They eat the way their parents ate, who eat the way their parents ate, who eat the way their parents ate. Think, some of the bastions in the Mediterranean. Think about the blue zone populations. They're not waiting to hear what's the right diet this week by tuning into the Today Show or Good Morning America. So these are some of the key themes. We talk a lot about diet. We just tend to get all of it wrong.
Yeah. You mentioned the Global Burden of Disease study. Would you enlighten our audience on that study and what it showed?
So this is an undertaking involving scientists in many countries around the world collaborating with oversight by the World Health Organization, using national databases to look at causes of death, and then extending beyond causes of death to causes of chronic morbidity, and looking beyond what gets listed on death certificates and hospital admission forms to the underlying factors that account for those. And let me digress from the Global Burden of Disease study for just a second to a paper from 30 years ago, which actually altered the trajectory of my career and is directly relevant. So I'm a product after medical school of sequential residencies, first in internal medicine, then in preventive medicine, public health. I finished all of that. So 9 years of postgraduate education, finished in 1993. And within weeks of being a newly minted preventive medicine specialist, this paper came out in the Journal of the American Medical Association. The title is Actual Causes of Death in the United States. And that sort of rocked me back on my heels. What do you mean actual causes of death? I mean, as a medical resident, I was taking care of patients in the hospital. People died. I filled out death certificates. I didn't think there was any mystery. But what these two authors did, Bill Foege, Mike McGinnis, two preeminent epidemiologists to this day, said, what gets listed on death certificates is the proximal cause of death. So for instance, somebody dies of cardiogenic shock, secondary to congestive heart failure, secondary to myocardial infarction, and maybe if you go that extra step, secondary to atherosclerosis of the coronary arteries. But what's left unaddressed in that sequence is what caused the atherosclerosis that's responsible for all this mayhem. Where on this list is something we can do something about? They answered that question. So they enumerated a list of 10 factors, which back in 1990 accounted for almost all of the premature deaths that occur in the United States every year. And what grabbed my attention as this newly minted preventive medicine specialist with a particular interest in nutrition and lifestyle was the first 3 entries on their list of 10, all by themselves, explained 80% of premature death, 80% of chronic disease. And those 3 things were bad use of feet, forks, and fingers. In other words, lack of physical activity, poor dietary pattern, and tobacco. Tobacco was number 1 30 years ago. Diet number 2, physical activity number 3. But if you fast forward to now, because of advances we've made against smoking, and because diet and physical activity have not improved very much and sometimes gone in the wrong direction, diet is number 1, the number 1 predictor. So the Global Burden of Disease study basically drills into that heritage. So they look not only at what are the proximal causes of premature death around the world, what are the proximal causes of chronic disease, years lost from life, life lost from years, but what are the underlying root causes, the modifiable causes? And in that global analysis across nations, populations, and a vast body of research using different methods, the conclusion reached is most chronic disease, most premature death is preventable by means at our disposal now. And the number 1 predictor variable in developed countries around the world is objectively measured diet quality.
80%, 90% of it, 95, less? What, most of it meaning what percentage?
Diet alone accounts in most studies for at least 50% of the variance.
Okay.
Diet in combination with not smoking and being physically active, 80% variance. And then the rest of the factors on that list back from 1993, the remainder, almost all premature death, not quite all, but most is preventable if we got some things right. Some of these things, by the way, are lifestyle choices under the control of individuals to some extent. We can come back to that topic. How much of this is the choices we make? How much of this is the choices we have? Important to note that the choices people make are subordinate to the choices people have, and not everybody has good choices. But some of the factors on this list have nothing to do with our individual bodies and everything to do with the body politic. So, for example, exposure to environmental contaminants and toxins. As individuals, there's not much we can do about that. We can only do something about that as citizens who vote by getting the right policymakers into positions of power to regulate the use of agricultural chemicals and other chemicals that otherwise we get exposed to.
What this brings up for me is, well, a whole list of other granular questions. When we're talking about nutrition, we're talking about our food choices. Where my mind goes is thinking about this in a more detailed level of, if we drill down, is this weighing more on the side of, say, malnutrition, where someone is not getting the proper B complex vitamins or the right minerals like magnesium and calcium? Perhaps they're not getting their protein requirements. Is it more on the malnutrition side or lack of good nutrition versus eating toxic, processed, industrialized foods? Is it a combination of both? Can you drill down a little bit more into that when we're talking about what is good nutrition for the human body and how do we adjust this?
That's a great question, Jason. So maybe let's start at the end there and say good nutrition for the human body. As you both know, Michael Pollan expressed it in 7 words: eat food, not too much, mostly plants. That's pretty damn good. And I would argue, as pithy and wise as Michael is, you actually could get it down to 4 words, because eat food, mostly plants. If you really eat real food, whole food, unprocessed or minimally processed food, mostly plants, the not too much takes care of itself. And the reason the not too much takes care of itself is because wholesome foods direct from nature fill us up on many fewer calories than ultra-processed food. In fact, ultra-processed food is willfully engineered to maximize the number of calories it takes to feel full. For those who want to know more on that topic, I encourage you to read Michael Moss. Michael Moss is a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist, author of 2 great books, Salt, Sugar, Fat, and Hooked, and a New York Times Magazine cover story entitled, verbatim, The Extraordinary Science of Addictive Junk Food. So before we had the work of Carlos Montero and the NOVA classification and the operational definition of ultra-processed food and the studies by Kevin Hall at the NIH, we had Michael Moss telling us about the extraordinary science of addictive junk food. In other words, food engineered to maximize the eating you do before you cry uncle and stop reaching for more. Wholesome food direct from nature reverse engineers that. It avoids that whole pitfall. And so eat food, mostly plants, not too much, will tend to take care of itself. So at a high level, Jason, at the end, when you say, what is right for the kind of animal we are, for Homo sapiens, what should humans eat? That's the basic theme. Eat real food, mostly plants. Mostly eat vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans, lentils, nuts, and seeds, and mostly drink water when you're thirsty, and you simply can't go too far wrong. That's all there is to it. plus or minus whatever else you might be inclined to add. Some people want to add some meat, okay, but that's not the main emphasis, or poultry or fish or seafood or dairy or eggs, or there are allowances for all these variations on the theme, but we're all the same kind of animal. We are all cousins. We all need the same basic stuff. And so to get the formula right, we can debate which variant on the theme we like best, but the theme is not negotiable any more than it is for dolphins or giraffes or zebras or lions or koala bears, or you pick any other species you happen to favor. There's a way that kind of animal should eat. That's true of us as well. Then your leading question, which matters more? Is it the excess or the deficiency? I routinely characterize the modern prevailing dietary patterns in the U.S. as islands of deficiency in a vast sea of excess. So our major problem tends to be excess. Excess of total eating. Most people are on the seafood diet. They see food and they eat it, and we see food everywhere. We eat way too much junk masquerading as food. We eat way too many calories. We tend to overeat protein because everybody sees a halo over it and thinks more's got to be better. We don't tend to have problems with overt nutrient deficiency because so many foods are fortified, and people often take supplements into the bargain. And we have access to a global food supply, so it's not as if we're getting all our food from one agricultural area where the soil is deficient in selenium or something. But we absolutely are subject to islands of deficiency. So our major problem, excess calories, excess food, excess saturated fat, excess sodium, excess added sugar, those are the big bad things. But we're all generally deficient in fiber because we're not mostly eating vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans, lentils, nuts, and seeds. We're eating ultra-processed food where all the fiber is stripped out. The grains we eat tend to be refined grains. So the entire U.S. population is fiber deficient and probably to some degree constipated as a result of it, along with a host of other potential ills that come of that. We're subject to deficiencies in select essential fatty acids, in particular the omega-3s. The omega-3s come from a variety of plant foods, walnuts, flax seeds, other seeds, and plants of marine origin, algae in particular, and fish and seafood. But people who are not routinely eating fatty fish and who are not eating a high intake of diverse plant foods tend to be prone to a relative deficiency of omega-3. We don't tend to see overt clinical manifestations, but the deficiencies there. In people who are strictly vegan, we have to worry about vitamin B12. In all of us, we'd have to worry about vitamin D. Vitamin D is not really a nutrient. We've turned it into a nutrient, but what it really is a hormone. And it's a hormone that we manufacture in our skin with exposure to sunlight. But because most of us are covered up, and many of us live in northern climes where we can't be outside in the sun all year anyway, we're subject to vitamin D deficiency. That tends to be addressed pretty effectively with widespread fortification of foods. And of course, many people take supplements. And so absolutely islands of deficiency. And I could go on. Because we're eating the wrong kinds of foods, we get way too much sodium, not enough potassium. We tend to get too little magnesium. We tend to get too little zinc. Most importantly, I would, again, put atop the list of deficiencies fiber, both soluble and insoluble, and we could talk about their specific effects. So those deficiencies are important. What's the remedy? How do you fix both the excess and the deficiency without fixating on a whole host of details? And you said you were going to drill down and make the question more granular. I think that's great at the level of the question. At the level of the answer, though, people want simple and actionable. So what's simple and actionable? Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. Eat mostly a variety of minimally or unprocessed vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans, lentils, nuts, and seeds. If you did that, you eat plant foods direct from nature, the excess of calories goes away. The excess of sodium goes away. The excess of sugar goes away. The excess of saturated fat goes away. The deficiency of fiber goes away. The deficiency of magnesium goes away. The deficiency of calcium goes away. The deficiency of zinc goes away. The deficiency of omega-3 potentially goes away, although you might want to supplement there. We can come back to that. But the answer is a wholesome variety of foods in an essential balance. It's not to focus on all the details. Yes, talking about all the details is good. Understanding it, I've written textbooks on this topic, so Lord knows I've spent plenty of time mired in the details of this. But at the end of the day, you get the big picture right. It takes care of all of the composite details, and that's far more actionable.
picking out a bit of what you said, like going a little bit more granular on a couple of topics that I think are constantly confusing to people because we hear from both sides, if you will, and the media, all sorts of different directions. One of them that you mentioned that I've learned that most of us are deficient in is B12, not just the vegans, because it's a microorganism and it lives in our soil and waterways. And almost all of our waterways are now polluted, and especially with detergents from our laundry, which are filled with microplastics, because most of our clothing that's fast fashion is plastic. Then we have a situation where even the omnivores or the carnivores or whatever are also starting to be deficient in B12. Is it true that it's no longer just if you're the vegan, because they're not getting it from the animals that they're eating, that we're eating and drinking from the waterways?
Absolutely. And so this doesn't necessarily mean everybody listening, you're suddenly B12 deficient and it's an emergency, but it means all of us should be paying attention to it. And it does make sense. Obviously, as a physician, if I saw any indication in my patient's clinical status or blood work of a potential nutrient deficiency, I can then do a test to look for that. And B12 is obviously on that list. And you would tend to see some indications of significant B12 deficiency. But generally, before there is clinically obvious deficiency, you can find it in the lab work. So if you have any doubt about whether or not you're getting enough vitamin D or B12, your doctor may or may not think about this, but you should, and you should advocate for yourself and say, I'd like to make sure that I don't have these islands of deficiency in my diet. And so absolutely, Dotsie, and how you characterize this is exactly right. Vitamin B12, cyanocobalamin, is a product of microorganisms that live in soil. But we have so disrupted the microbiome of soils around the world and depleted soils in such a way that we can't rely on that organism being there. We can't rely on there being the normal production of B12 in the soil, which then prevents the normal amounts of B12 getting into plant foods and being bioconcentrated in animal foods. And by the way, like so much of the folklore about diet, the idea that B12 only exists in animal foods is false. It's just bioconcentrated in animal foods, so you get much more of it. And vegans are prone to get too little. And even with what you just explained, vegans are especially prone because it will still, whatever's available will be bioconcentrated in animals. And so there is some risk for all of us not getting enough B12 these days. There is a particularly greater risk for genuinely strict vegans. There are some things that can be done to compensate for that without overt supplementation. Nutritional yeast, for example, is a concentrated source of B12, and it's also a good substitute for salt because it has that same quality. It's quite astringent on the tongue, and the taste perception is remarkably similar to salt, even though it doesn't contain a high amount of sodium. And it also happens to be a source of B12. And I know a number of strict vegans make use of that. But I would argue that knowing where there are these islands of deficiency is the exact information we need to do supplementation right. And let's just spend a minute on that term, because obviously all of us are advocating for getting diet right. And without question, there is no compensation for getting diet wrong in a pill. There is no pill, no supplement, no vitamin, no alternative that can do for you what optimizing your diet quality can do. But even if you optimize your diet quality, you could still have some nutrient deficiencies. That's what supplementation is all about. The very word supplement implies supplemental to something. We don't ever talk about the something. When we talk about taking vitamins or minerals or any sort of supplement, we don't start the conversation by saying, I know what my dietary intake is. I know what my level of intake is more or less of all the different nutrients, and I know where I have deficiencies relative to what's optimal, and that's where I supplement. But that's the conversation we should be having. This whole phase of my career is focused on a new way to assess dietary intake. And when we do that in about 60 seconds, we generate approximate intake levels for 200 different nutrients. And I think that's what we should be doing for everybody. I think diet quality should be a vital sign. I think dietary intake assessment should be universal because it can be now. And we should know what nutrients people are or are not getting from their food, and we should supplement appropriately so you get what you need rather than taking things that you probably don't. But yes, if we did that routinely, we would find that more and more of us are potentially subject to B12 deficiency. So if in doubt, ask your doc, do the test, check your level, and see whether or not you need some more.
I'm curious if there's a cost-effective way to determine this. Years ago, I started getting annual blood panels done with my doctor to really just check in on vitamins, lipoproteins, cholesterol, vitamins, the whole thing, and it's allowed me to get a pretty accurate snapshot of what I need to supplement in. And the reason I started doing this, Dr. Katz, is years prior, I had been vegan maybe a decade, and I realized what I was doing was kind of throwing darts at a dartboard, trying to hit the bullseye with a blindfold on. I'm a little sluggish. I don't know. Maybe I need more L-theanine for brain function, or maybe my B vitamins are low, or God, my immunity's down. Do I need, do I need vitamin C? Do I need, it was basically going to the supplement aisle at the natural food store, buying things that they're here, try this. Now, the downside for some people is that for the kind of blood panel test I get, it's on the more expensive side. I want a full snapshot so I can really adjust, tweak my diet, supplementation. I've been vegan 27 years now, so I do want to turn those dials. But is there as equally effective of a way for most people that doesn't cost, $1,500 for a blood test plus the follow-ups?
Yeah, I think there is. So let's just look at the population, unfortunately divided into two camps, those with and without good health insurance and access to clinical resources. Sadly, that's a conversation we have to have in the United States, where you can't just assume everybody has access to clinical care. And ordinarily, when I talk about diet and lifestyle, I remind people this is not a clinical enterprise. This is a cultural enterprise. You look at the places around the world where people derive the greatest benefit from diet and living well. They're not thanking their doctors because they never see doctors, right? When you hear about the blue zones, it's all about the culture. It's not about the clinics. And as a past president of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, during my tenure, that's what I talked about. Lifestyle in medicine is good, where we help people live well in clinical encounters. But lifestyle as medicine, where living well just happens out in the real world, that's really a whole lot better. And that's really the best way to get there from here. But in our system, we have a culture that conspires against health. And then people go to enlightened clinicians to get some help to do the appropriate lab work. But sadly, we have to acknowledge that some people don't have the insurance. So if you're uninsured, my answer would be, if you have significant issues impacting your health, look at them holistically first. In other words, you mentioned fatigue, for example, and then throwing darts at the board to see what nutrient you should take, but maybe it's not a nutrient issue at all. Maybe it's work-related stress. Although if you're working with Dotsie, I can't imagine that would be the case. But back then, who knows? Back then it could have been. But it could be relationships. It could be stress. It could be thyroid dysfunction. It could be the aftermath of an infection. It could be a whole host of things. So the first thing to do is look at yourself more holistically and say, can I account for this? And if I were thinking just in terms of probable explanations, am I sleeping well? Am I stressed? Am I generally taking good care of myself? Am I generally fulfilled? Do I have healthy social connections? All those things belong on that list before you get to supplementing nutrients, right? Because you've already made an assumption that this has to be nutrient related. It might be, but it might not be. And for those who do have insurance, I recommend exactly the same process, but with the help of a health professional. Describe what you're feeling without concluding the reason for it, and open up a broader dialogue about all these other domains that influence health. And then if you have insurance, generally those same tests you're describing, Jason, can be done without any particular cost to you, right? So whatever those assays actually cost is worked out between the lab, like Quest, for example, and the insurer, and that maybe you get charged some of the difference, but it tends to be fairly nominal. And if it's ordered by a doctor because of a specific indication, we use particular codes to indicate that this is a valid test that warrants being done. It's a nominal cost. So they're the haves, all those of us who have good access to the clinical system, where this should be pursued, can be pursued with the help of a health professional. Everybody else, you want to think about yourself holistically. And then I hesitate to say this, but you know it's going to happen anyway. You're going to ask ChatGPT or use some other interface in AI, Dr. Google, Dr. AI, to try and figure out what is this likely to be. That's fraught because it can go badly wrong, although frankly it can go badly wrong with a human health professional as well, depending on whether their mind is open, closed, what they're willing to entertain. But if you're cautious, if you make sure that you're providing good, honest information about yourself in a holistic context, and then using AI not to get a definitive answer, but to learn something about probable explanations. And then maybe at that point, you already have a pretty good idea of what needs fixing. And you're at least empowered to go pursue the right resources to get it fixed, whether that's clinical care or something else. So I think there's a process here. And I would say, as an internist who's trained to think very broadly, there's a joke, by the way, about doctors, in particular, internists and surgeons. And the joke is internists know everything and do nothing. I hope there are no surgeons listening. Surgeons know nothing and do everything. Neither of those things is quite true, but that's what I sort of grew up medically learning. So internists know everything. I mean, we're talking about you give us a symptom, we tell you 10,000 things it could be, and that's too much. But on the other hand, immediately concluding I feel A, it must be B, is way too little, right? So that holistic assessment of either self or holistic assessment of you with the help of a health professional is the way to hang the dartboard on the right wall in the first place. We can worry about the bullseye in a subsequent step.
I feel like nutrition guidelines are almost deliberately written to protect industry interest. And I find it, and I'm sure you do too, so frustrating at how confused people are, right? They are getting so much of the wrong information in all the right and wrong places. I mean, it's everywhere if you want to go digging for it. And how are people supposed to suss through any of this information and know what truly is good for them from a nutrition and other aspects, movement aspects? Although that's not nearly as confusing because just move at all and you're ahead of the next person. But I am curious in your opinion on, could big food, big ag, big pharma, would they even be in business? Would they survive if people actually ate and lived optimally? And going back to the beginning of the podcast, so that, we have about 80% control, right? Maybe 20% not. It seems to me like maybe they would survive, but they certainly wouldn't be thriving with the big buckets of money they have now.
So I would unbundle the two.
Okay.
Big food will survive no matter what because everybody's going to eat. We could eat a whole heck of a lot better, but we're still going to eat.
They would just shift what they were peddling.
Yeah. And actually, it's a great opportunity to talk about what we might call a natural experiment, proving the power of the food demand over the food supply. I'm always inclined to think about the early aughts. People may not know that Dr. Atkins first introduced his ketogenic low carbohydrate diet in the 1970s. Didn't really take off then. I guess he figured out, how to market it more effectively. Plus he won over Gary Taubes when he came back 20 years later in the late 1990s. And he called it the Atkins New Diet Revolution. And I compared what the book that had come out in the 1970s and the book that came out in the late 1990s. And the only difference I could find was new in the title. It was just the same. He just knew everybody had forgotten about it by then. Let's try it again. And sure enough, this time it took off. And everybody fell in love with the notion of low carbohydrate eating overnight. Tens of millions of people were doing the Atkins diet. At that time, in let's call it 2000, 2001, there were no low carbohydrate products in any U.S. supermarket because there hadn't been a demand for them. Overnight, there was. And I watched a phenomenon where in a span of not more than about 6 to 12 weeks, supermarkets around the country started to generate a portfolio of low carbohydrate foods. Sadly, most of them were low carbohydrate junk. Entenmann's had low carbohydrate brownies where the first ingredient was partially hydrogenated oil. So I'm not telling you this stuff was good for you.
Right. And they were the ones that did the fat-free brownies like 20 years before that.
Exactly. That's right.
No oil.
You can get any variety of junk food you want in the United States. Yay, go us. So the remarkable thing simply was there had been a change in the demand. There was no policy reform. There was no legislation. There was no litigation. There was no class action movement of any kind. There was just a massive population shift in interest and demand. And the food supply generated an entirely new inventory of offerings in weeks. Now, imagine if we focused instead of, the latest boondoggle on overall quality, overall diet quality, wholesome foods. Imagine if we all listen to Michael Pollan and really only wanted to eat wholesome foods and sensible varieties. They do the same. So big food wouldn't go away. They'd figure out ways to address convenience and quality and package things in a convenient way. There are many things they could do that would add value to what they're selling us, preserve their profit margins, but not sell us junk because we wouldn't be willing to buy it. If we stop buying junk, they'll stop selling junk. Pharma is another story. I've had morbid fantasies for years about the CEO of Big Food and the CEO of Big Pharma in a smoky boardroom with the door closed, grinning at one another, shaking hands, saying, hey, have we got a great deal going? You sell them stuff to make them fat and sick. We'll sell them stuff to treat the diseases you're causing, and we'll both laugh about it all the way to the bank. And that's what America runs on. So, yes, there would be implications for pharma, but let me just append. As a physician who believes fervently in the power of diet, nutrition, lifestyle, and frankly, I've said for years, the master levers of medical destiny are what we do every day with our feet, forks, and fingers, because that's 80% of the variance in health outcomes right there. It's not functional MRI machines or coronary cath labs, feet, forks, and fingers. But stuff still happens. People are going to have traumas. People are going to get infectious diseases. People are going to have genetic maladies and metabolic maladies. And these things are going to happen even if you take optimal care of yourself, because although we can control ship and sail, we will never control wind and wave, right? So your body's the vessel, and even if you take optimal care of it, stuff can happen. And when stuff happens, we're going to be very glad to have modern medicine at our disposal. And I've been in that position myself, whether related to injury and needing orthopedists to put me back together or infections. I had a bout of anaplasmosis I really thought was going to kill me. And I got better in the hospital on antibiotics, and I thought I'm a lifestyle medicine specialist, but damn, I'm glad these antibiotics are available because they're saving my life right now. So it's not an either or choice. So yes, the role of big pharma in our lives could be massively less. People are absolutely taking drugs to substitute for healthy living right now. The GLP-1s. I mean, the massive use of these drugs is for obesity and type 2 diabetes, both of which are effectively completely preventable. There need be none of either or very near to none. Some people might have extreme genetic vulnerability, but the fact that these are both pandemics, it's because there's way too much junk where food ought to be, way too little physical activity where that ought to be. It's a matter of culture and lifestyle. So yes, smaller place in our lives for big pharma, but they wouldn't go out of business by any means. And big food would produce different products to keep the customer satisfied.
Just since you mentioned GLP-1s, I feel like I'm starting to hear some of the risky business of taking GLP-1s and the dangers. But, I don't know what they are. Are there some significant dangers down the road or immediate?
Yeah. So minor, what might be called inconvenient side effects are quite common. And, are these really minor? Diarrhea, nausea, they sound pretty unpleasant. Those are common. The other thing is there are some effects that occur to some extent in almost everyone that are undesirable. Most of these drugs seem to preferentially mobilize lean body mass. So you lose weight and you lose body fat, but you actually disproportionately lose muscle mass along with it. And that's a very unhealthy thing. It doesn't look good, it doesn't feel good, and it's quite dangerous over time. It affects the distribution of subcutaneous fat in your body. So many people have what they refer to as GLP-1 face because they mobilize subcutaneous fat and even some of the muscle from their face, so the skin of their face kind of hangs. So there are a number of common effects that are undesirable. And then there's less common stuff that is very concerning. It can happen. It's not rare, but it's not probable either. And that would be conditions like gallbladder disease, pancreatitis, which can be lethal. And one that's getting a lot of attention now is macular degeneration. The risk of macular degeneration seems to go up. That's a special problem because these drugs are preferentially used in diabetes, and diabetes is one of the most salient risk factors for macular degeneration. So now the thing you're using to treat diabetes so routinely increases the risk of something associated with the diabetes in the first place. And macular degeneration, once it's advanced, cannot be reversed, and it potentially leads to blindness. So that's pretty serious. So yes, these drugs are powerful. They are stunningly good. I confess I'm surprised at how good they are. I've been arguing for years, we will never find the remedy for obesity in a pill. And these things come shockingly close, but they're not a panacea, and they absolutely do have liabilities. And since we can solve the problem of obesity and related metabolic health issues with our daily use of feet and forks, those of us who are empowered to do that, why would you not choose that option? Think of all the advantages. Cost much less, no harmful side effects. The only side effects are more vitality, more years in life, more life in years. And unlike your GLP-1 prescription, you can pay forward lifestyle. You can share it with your significant other. You can share it with your children. You can share it with everybody you love and get healthy together. You're not going to do that with anything that Big Pharma is selling you.
There is nothing more frustrating than feeling like your body is working against you. Digestive troubles, gut pain, skin issues, constant congestion, yet never knowing what's causing these issues. If that sounds familiar, it's time for you to take our new gut health quiz. In just 3 minutes, you will find out if dairy is behind your symptoms like diarrhea, heartburn, constipation, bloating, acne, or the never-ending mucus. And here's the good news. There is a solution. You don't have to keep living with these symptoms. Take the quiz, get answers, and start feeling like yourself again. Take the 3-minute gut health quiz today at switch4good.org/gut-health-quiz. Again, that's switch4good.org/gut-health-quiz and start feeling better today. I'm curious about, as we learn more about the deleterious health effects of ultra-processed foods, if you anticipate that we may go in a direction culturally or even legally where we start to see food companies as culpable, much as we did tobacco companies over the decades, of once we really got all the research together and saw their marketing. And of course, we now know that, Big Food takes many of their marketing cues from Big Tobacco's playbook. Do you see a future where it's possible we could hold big food manufacturers legally accountable for the toxic additives that are harming people's health?
There is a class action lawsuit against food companies for producing ultra processed food and the harms that they've done. And the question is whether or not it will prevail, but it's an indication of what's to come. So my answer, Jason, is I hope so. Back to an earlier comment, Michael Moss, The Extraordinary Science of Addictive Junk Foods, has just unpacked that a little bit, what Moss wrote about. And frankly, what had been covered in a 4-part expose in the Chicago Tribune 10 years earlier than that. This expose is very hard to find online now. It's been expunged from the internet somehow. But if you search the right terms, you at least find shadows of it. It was called The Oreo, Obesity, and Us. It was a 4-part expose spanning 2005-2006. And the 4th entry, the culminating entry, was where there's smoke, there may be food research too. And just to give people the story quickly, The information was derived by a team of investigative journalists then at the Chicago Tribune, who had access to 3 million pages of documents under subpoena from the big tobacco companies under the terms of the class action settlement with the state attorneys general. So there had been a big class action tobacco lawsuit under the Freedom of Information Act. They had to turn over all these proprietary documents. These journalists went through it all. And what they found and reported was that, wait a minute, folks, this is not just about tobacco. Altria is a holding company. They own Philip Morris. They also own Kraft Food. And what they've done behind the scenes is hire Kraft Food scientists and Philip Morris tobacco scientists and said, hey, fellas, we'll give you all the same functional MRI machines and marching orders. Figure out how to use what we know about the human nervous system to make our products maximally addictive. So the tobacco scientists were figuring out what to put in cigarettes to help get young people started and hooked. And the food scientists were doing what Michael Moss wrote again about 10 years later, manufacturing, engineering food toward the bliss point to maximize the calories it took to feel full. And they were working together. So not only are they working from the same playbook in terms of marketing and disinformation, they were literally working together using the same technology to devise addictive products. So should they be held accountable? Hell yeah. I mean, you have to ask people who've heard this information, where is the collective outrage, right? How is it that every parent and grandparent in the country is not outraged and all forming our collective transpartisan pack to say, fix this for crying out loud? You're mortgaging the health of children for the sake of corporate profit. So I sure hope so. The problem is twofold. One, food is complicated. So the merchants of doubt have more opportunity to hide in the fog of confusion about diet than ever they did with tobacco. Tobacco was a dichotomous choice. Smoke, don't smoke. Food is not that simple, right? And tobacco, it's not necessary. And proving that it was bad because there was a very strong signal of its links to emphysema and lung cancer was pretty easy. The linkages in food are abstruse. They're complicated. Is it the food? Is it the dietary pattern? Is it just the one food? Is it many foods? We can just keep asking questions forever and never land on a definitive answer. I'm not saying we should, but that's kind of how we roll. There's just more fog to hide in. That's one problem. And the second problem is just the general state of our politics. We're so divided. And so there's easily half the population that feels that, if you do anything to regulate the food industry, your civil liberties are being trampled. And yet, we don't expect to have to ask, is there arsenic in my ice cream? You shouldn't have to ask that question. Is there mercury in my French fries? I mean, what if, I'm making this up, but what if mercury mixed into the vat where you boil the potatoes makes French fries crispier? If we truly had no regulation, then somebody would figure out, if I toss mercury in there, the French fries are crispier, I sell more French fries. Yeah, I'm killing people, but I'm not killing them immediately. They're not going to know it was me, so I can get away with it, and I can sell more French fries and make more money. What the hell? People need to realize that if nothing were regulated, we would be living in a world of constant peril, where anybody willing to game the system for financial advantage would do it, no matter the cost to our health or the health of our children. I don't think anybody wants to live in that world. I also understand that people don't want to live in a nanny state where the government tells you what you're allowed to eat for breakfast. The sweet spot is somewhere in between there, where the things that should be regulated are regulated and things that shouldn't be regulated are left to your personal choice. That's what we should all be rallying around. And I don't think willfully addictive junk food is on the right side of that line. That should be regulated away. And yes, there should be lawsuits, and I hope the one that's currently underway prevails. But I don't know. We will all have to wait and see.
Yeah, it seems the most frustrating to me is how, there's so many aspects of ultra processed foods and how frustrating they are, because not everybody understands what is doing to them. And this is a little bit more of a psychology question, but I'm wondering if you think if people knew the extent to which ultra processed foods like Little Debbie's and hot nacho cheese Doritos and Coca-Cola, those are ultra processed foods. If people knew how they actually hijack our biology and our brain chemistry, which we've had quite a few guests on here speaking about that. Do you think it would trigger, well, it might trigger mass confusion, but because they've been taught differently, but do you think the public would become outraged, or because they're so addicted, do you think it would just turn into denial?
It's a great question. Yeah. So just first, just to make sure we level the playing field here, I want to point out that some foods that are significantly processed and that under the NOVA classification qualify as ultra processed are not bad. I think that the intention behind the food is a really important consideration. So it's a Venn diagram, right? You could put a very simple Venn diagram. You've got the universe of bad food, which, by the way, from my point of view, includes beef because it does harm to people, animals, and the planet. But it's not ultra processed necessarily, although what you feed the cattle could argue for it being ultra processed. But you've got bad food, food that does harm to people and planet. And then you've got ultra processed food. Those two squares overlap massively, but there are highly processed foods that are not bad, and there are bad foods that are not highly processed. As a for instance, I've been quite disturbed to see the plant-based meat market beat up by my colleagues in nutrition because they got on the ultra-processed food train and said, Beyond and Impossible, these are clearly ultra-processed concoctions. So, whoa, not so fast. These were processed in a specific way to do a specific good. One, to reduce consumption of beef, which is harming our fellow creatures, harming the planet, and harming human health. And two, to appeal to the palate of people who are not willing to give up meat, because I don't need these things. I'm a plant-based eater. I don't need Beyond or Impossible. I don't want them. But if I'm talking to patients who say, I love to eat meat, I'm not willing to give it up, but I'd sure like to be healthier, and I don't want to be responsible for damaging the Amazon rainforest. It's for them. And I want options for them. And, if we can over time make it cleaner and less processed and achieve the same outcome, great. But frankly, I'll take it as it is. And so, I think we've, to some extent, with our fixation on ultra processed food, tossed out the baby with the bathwater. And we have to be really careful about that. In terms of, could we get people outraged? I've tried. I spent my whole career trying to do this. And, I think if you sit down with an individual and they trust you and they know you and they're really listening to you, then yes. The question has been, how do we reach everybody everywhere and say, look, even you libertarians who don't want anybody else trampling on your civil liberties, don't you understand that big food is doing that right now with zero accountability? I know you don't want the government doing it. I get that. But at least if the government is regulating something, it's probably you're going to know about it. It's probable they have to tell you. It's going to be in the public domain. Whereas what big food is doing to hijack your brain, your neurochemistry, and manipulate the hell out of you, they have no obligation to tell anybody but the members of their board in a closed-door meeting. You have no clue. They are manipulating you. They are manipulating your loved ones. They are manipulating your children. They are doing whatever they want to extract maximal profit from you. You have no control, you have no say, and you don't even know they're doing it. So if you are a genuine libertarian, how do you feel about that level of manipulation, right? The government would at least be more transparent. So, it seems to me there are conversations we could have across the political spectrum that would rally people to this cause. But the problem is we're not very good at even listening to one another these days, right? Hang on. I'm not listening to you. You're not in my tribe. It doesn't matter what you say. I'm just not listening. As you know, Dotsie, I created a nonprofit, the True Health Initiative. I'm honored and delighted that you're a member of the council. And the idea there was that people listen to their heroes. And the people who've already signed up for the carnivore diet or paleo diet, they're just not going to listen to the vegans. And the people who signed up to the vegans are not going to listen to the experts about the Mediterranean diet. What if we could get them all together to say the things that matter most we all agree about? And you never hear us talk about agreement because agreement is not titillating enough for the morning show. So when someone gives us a microphone, they want to hear why we're special and think things differently than anybody else. So the person who spent their career studying the Mediterranean diet will tell you that's best. And the person who studied a low-fat diet will tell you that's best. And the vegans will tell you that's best. But if you say, wait, let's ask a different question. Sorry. Not, why does your approach beat my approach? But okay, folks, could you tell me what are the fundamentals of a health promoting diet, the fundamentals of a health promoting lifestyle? And I've actually done this exercise in a number of contexts, and there's 95%. Anyway, sorry about the dogs. I don't know what's got them all worked up. I've seen the dog going up and down the stairs in your house, so I imagine you'd be sympathetic. There's 95% confluent across a vast expanse of perspectives and personal practices and disciplines. So the True Health Initiative conveys that out to the world. And ask me a long question. Let me see if I can suppress the canine mayhem while I put on my mute button for just a second.
Okay. Just going back for one moment to, the thinking around, because it's been created, the thinking has been created by the other side, Rick Berman, the large veterinary companies that serve antibiotics to animal ag, and they have picked out this one word, methylcellulose, which is a binder for, putting, like you said before, some of those plant-based meats, so they bind better, like a Beyond or an Impossible. But it's also sold in dietary fiber is cellulose. I mean, you can find all sorts of methylcellulose that you would use as an extra fiber therapy or whatever it might be on the internet. So even vegans are like, I don't really know what it is, but it can't be that bad. But a lot of people think it just sounds horrible. Oh, that's, I think it's the methyl word, and cellulose doesn't sound good either. And that's just what our brains do. But is it harmful at all? Should we everyone just chill on that? Because that's what they plucked out, and that's what they, just sort of ran home for, the last 5 years, right? It's ultra processed, and it has words in it and ingredients in it that are words that you can't pronounce and don't know what they are. So it must be bad. That's basically what they sold.
That was a good long question. Thank you. And there was massive triple mayhem. No, they're not quite done yet. So it's a challenging question to answer. I don't have a problem with methylcellulose. It's basically the stuff of cell walls in plants. And so it does not frighten me per se. In general, when you're extracting the components of foods, we know altogether too little about what they do to us in isolation. So, for example, if you eat fiber as part of whole grains or legumes, we know about all the metabolic benefits. These days, more and more, there's the prospect of grains stripped of their fiber, but then there's a concoction where some particular source of fiber is added back in. And we don't know for sure, because the matrix of that food has been changed, if that exerts all the same metabolic effects. So methylcellulose as an isolated ingredient, I would say I need to know more. What else is in this food? How is this being used? What was taken out and what was put in? But methylcellulose, the fact that it's a long name per se, it may or may not be familiar to you, but it may not mean anything harmful. And in this case, it's not something harmful. It's the basic structural component of the cell walls of all plants, and it's not intrinsically harmful. When we developed years ago at my lab at Yale a food label literacy program for children called Nutrition Detectives, which we gave away for free and is used all around the world to this day. And it was all curriculum, but we distilled it down to 5 clues that fit on a refrigerator magnet. And probably the single most salient of those 5 clues was the shorter the ingredient list, the better. And the reason for that is, the very best foods of all have an ingredient list 1 word long, right? I mean, you just can't, if the ingredient list is broccoli, you can't really hide anything in there, or blueberries or almonds, or, pick what you like. Short ingredient lists tend to be good. But the other was look for stuff in the ingredient list that you don't recognize as being food and be wary of that, right? If it's unpronounceable and you have no idea what it is, you want to be cautious about that. But it's easy to oversimplify that one. Of course, fortified foods will often list the name of the nutrients with which they're fortified. And that may be a good thing, not a bad thing. But those are long chemical names too. And so with every rule come the exceptions. Methylcellulose is a long word. It does not frighten me.
I feel like that's what Big Ag has honed in on forever, because they don't have to tell you what is in their beef. And so they put beside what they just say beef, right? All of the list of ingredients in like a Beyond Burger or whatever it might be on the left-hand side. And then theirs is just beef. When we know that there are toxic chemicals, antibiotics, hormones, the list is endless, but they don't have to reveal what's in the beef. So people think it's the one list ingredients like broccoli.
You know, that's a really good point, and it raises several subsidiary points. First, I think you highlight something absolutely crucial, Dotsie, and that is when you list ingredients, you're listing the things you put in there on purpose, not the stuff that gets in there. So, you know, you don't list on any ingredient package, you don't list residual herbicide, residual pesticide, residual antibiotic, you know, stuff
right.
from the
And
environment.
If I may, because I have to put this in here, when we were doing some research for some of the campaigns, meat and dairy are toxic, on the Cattlemen Ranchers website are the 6 antibiotics that the USDA makes them shoot into the cows. So there's also, you know, they're real obvious about it. It's not just from the soil or having, you know, some grass that was sprayed.
Right. But
yeah.
you know, when you buy a hamburger or steak, you don't see, and the ingredients include a specific amount of this antibiotic. They're not going to tell you that. So
right.
One important consideration is you don't get complete information about what's in your food, because what's in your food comes from what's in the world, and we have mucked up the world. We've contaminated the planet in so many ways. Microplastics are in your food now, almost all of your food. And they're not on the ingredient list either, right? So that's a really important point. It doesn't change the fundamentals of eating well. You should still mostly eat vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans, lentils, nuts, and seeds. Is it an argument for eating organic when you can? Yes, in certain instances. If you can find it, afford it, it's better for the planet, probably better for you. Otherwise, just, you know, rinse fruits and vegetables. If you're eating the outer surface of something, wash it and wash away residual chemicals that may be there. But the other key point about beef is back to my Venn diagram, right? Bad food, ultra processed food. So in general, you're teaching an 8-year-old, you know, if you're looking at a food label, something that comes in a bag, box, bottle, jar, can, the shorter the ingredient list, generally the better. But it's not a universal rule. In the same way that not all ultra processed food is bad and not all bad food is ultra processed, I think the single most important change we should be making to our diets is eating less beef. Beef is off the charts with regard to environmental impact compared to any other food. Off the charts. You actually, and I literally mean off the charts in the sense that for anybody who remembers any math from high school or before, you have to use a logarithmic scale to put beef on the same chart as any other food for its environmental impact. And that includes land use, water use, eutrophication, which is the use of nitrogen as a fertilizer to raise the crops that feed the cattle, and most importantly, greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a high contribution of greenhouse gas emissions from raising cattle, and that's even before we consider the possibility that they're being raised in what used to be the Amazon rainforest, which was burned down to make room for more pasture land. Even without that, high cost in terms of those 4 key contributions to environmental degradation. And because we get more protein than we need, and because most of us eat way too much saturated fat, and because beef is not a source of the stuff we get too little of, and it doesn't contain any fiber, and if we were to eat beans instead of beef, we would be getting none of the saturated fat, and we would be getting the fiber, and we would be getting the micronutrients we need, and the single most impactful food choice we can probably all make would be to eat less beef. And that has nothing to do with ultra processing. Even if it didn't contain antibiotics, even if it didn't have chemicals in it, even if it weren't a source of microplastics, the problem with eating beef is that it's beef. And then in addition to that, what you say is absolutely true. There's stuff in food that shouldn't be in food, that doesn't get listed on ingredient lists, but that is in food. And it tends to be much more highly concentrated in animal food because animals bioconcentrate the food they eat. This is a known problem, for example, in fish. So large predatory fish like tuna, you have to worry about heavy metals. Why? Well, because big fish eat smaller fish, who eat smaller fish, who eat smaller fish, who eat algae and plankton. And you go down closer to the bottom of the food chain, there's not very much bioconcentration. And the levels in the flesh of the animal are very low. As you move up the food chain, there's more and more bioconcentration. And so you wind up with toxic levels of exposure.
Ugh. Jason.
I mean, to eat a completely pure diet now, you have to do it on a different planet, right? I mean, we all have to be realistic and pragmatic. We live on Earth. There are 8 billion of us, and we've been mucking around with the planet for a long time. So we've messed some stuff up.
Yeah.
But perfect should not be made the enemy of good. If you eat a diet of mostly vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans, lentils, nuts, and seeds, and mostly drink plain water when thirsty, you can still live to be 100 and avoid all chronic disease. You can have a bounty of years in life and life years despite the contamination. That doesn't mean we should be blind to the contamination. It doesn't mean we shouldn't all be citizens advocating to clean up our environment, not be making use of single-use plastic, rallying against the contribution of microplastics to the global ecosystem and all of that. Yeah, we should be doing all that too. But what we often tend to do, and this is a mistake, is we focus on the very small risks we can't directly control to the exclusion of the massive risks we can. Again, I'm a preventive medicine specialist. I've long had a fantasy about a guy. My guy drinks a 6-pack of beer, smokes a pack of cigarettes, gets on his motorcycle without a helmet, and drives 100 miles an hour through traffic to get to a rally about dioxin. That's my guy, because it's the dioxin that's going to kill you, doc. You got to do something about that. Wait a minute. Whoa, you're eating horribly. You're smoking. You're an alcoholic, and you're driving 100 miles an hour on a motorcycle without a helmet, and you're worried about dioxin. That's how people operate, right? I mean, if I can't do anything about it, it's going to worry the hell out of me. I'm going to completely ignore all the massive risks I do control. I'm going to let my feelings be known about the risks I don't. People tend to function like that. So don't be that guy, right? I mean, yeah, I'm not happy about microplastics and all the rest, but get the fundamental pattern of diet right. That massively overwhelms the influence of these other exposures.
So that is so well said. Go. Last question, Jason.
We're talking a lot about
don't be that guy.
Don't be that guy. Well, that's the title of the show. We figured that out.
It's interesting to think about this, right? Because we're talking about a personal agency, personal choice, people making choices out of hopefully a newfound level of self-awareness and wanting to make personal changes. Then there's the other side, which is sort of policy changes, right? So we've got personal agency and we've got policy. And I'm curious, Dr. Katz, if you had an hour to spend with world leaders, people who have the ability to make change at a fundamental level of policy affecting public health, what's the number one thing that you would request of them to change?
Well, first, Jason, before picking something, I just want to emphasize the importance of the point you're making, right? So I said earlier, choices people make are subordinate to the choices people have, and you're saying the same thing, and it's crucial. And we could be talking about the social determinants of health. We've long acknowledged in public health that your zip code is far more predictive of your health outcomes than your genetic code. And there are places where people are in food swamps and food deserts, and there are no good choices. And you can't just wave a finger at those people and tell them to eat well and expect anything to change. There's a need at a very high level, coordinated out of the NIH or organizations that august, to ask the question, where does agency, born of information, education, imparting skills, if we go a step further, where does it suffice and where does it not? Where is it necessary and where is it sufficient? And where it's insufficient, what else needs to change? But the questions we're asking should always be pragmatically informed. What is the outcome we want to see, and what does it take to get there from here? We can't just assume that education's enough. And when education needs to be combined with something else, what's the something else? And in some instances, we could reach the conclusion education is unimportant. The information is never the basis for action. People will do this thing if it's the default, if it's easy. Knowing about it never makes the difference. And there are many examples around the world and in many domains where we decide we're going to make this a default because it's too hard and too complicated to opt in. We're going to make it an opt-out choice. Some 401ks and layaway plans are like that, where you have to opt out. And if you don't opt out, you're just going to be signed up. If you didn't go to the trouble of picking your health insurance through your employer, there's a default that you're going to be signed up for rather than leaving you without insurance because you didn't happen to come to the website in time. There are many instances where giving people information is not very effective, and we've chosen another way. We see the same thing with motor vehicles, where a lot of what makes them safer is not relying on people to behave more responsibly when driving. In fact, we tend to be less responsible now because everybody's texting while they drive. We've engineered it into the cars, steel safety cages, seat belts that either are automatic or annoying as hell if you don't click them right. So we said, telling people how important it is to use a seatbelt doesn't work. Having an annoying alarm go off if they don't close their seatbelt, that will probably work better. So let's do that. And, on and on it goes. So we often need to engineer the solutions in. So critically important issue that we should not in today's conversation convey the impression that everyone has agency over these lifestyle choices and diets. Some of us do. For some of us, it is a matter of making good choices because we have good choices and we have the information. For some people, they don't have either the information or the availability of good choices. They can't do anything. And then the question becomes, what do you do to help them? So the first part of my answer to what I tell people is we should be studying this in a way that is systematically directed at knowing who needs what to get there from here. And then we should be populating a portfolio of actions. Some are in the public domain, some are in the personal domain, some are educational, some are policy reform. But they should all be about empowering people to make it through whatever labyrinth they happen to be living in. My shorter answer, and this is maybe a case of have hammer, see nail, but I would argue the nails were sticking up everywhere, and so I invented the hammer. If I could change just one thing right now, I would make diet quality a vital sign. I've been working on that for the past decade. We have several patents in that space, multiple peer-reviewed publications, and it's possible to treat diet quality like we treat blood pressure, and that's the reason I would make that argument. Just very briefly, before the invention of the blood pressure cuff and its uptake in medicine, we already knew that blood pressure was a major predictor of heart attack, stroke, kidney failure, blindness, other bad outcomes. But how did we know that somebody had impaired blood pressure? They had a heart attack, stroke, kidney failure, blindness. In other words, we never got upstream. We waited for downstream mayhem and said, your blood pressure must be a problem. Why? We weren't used to measuring blood pressure routinely, and there was no convenient way to do it. We could do it, but we did it with intra-arterial catheters, which are very unpleasant. I put them in people, they never enjoyed it. You only do that in the ICU. So until we had an easy, scalable, efficient, non-invasive way to measure blood pressure, it was out of the question. But then we did. And what changed? Everything. Every expectation changed. Over time, it became a universal clinical measure. Every patient I've ever talked to knows whether their blood pressure is okay or not okay. Every doc, every health professional is obligated to check your blood pressure and deal with it. New medical specialties were born. Medical education was reformed massively. New pharmacotherapy, new lifestyle interventions, new clinical standards, new measures of the adequacy of hospital care. Everything changed because we measured it. We manage what we measure. And when you've got actionable intel in your face for everybody, and it's upstream, the downstream ramifications are incredible. So, for instance, the rate of stroke was slashed with the routine measurement of blood pressure because then we started to treat it before waiting for the stroke to indicate that it was broken. Where we are today with diet is where we were before the invention of the blood pressure cuff. We wait for the obesity, we wait for the diabetes, we wait for the metabolic impairment, and then say, maybe we should talk about your diet. We shouldn't be doing that. We should be measuring everybody's diet quality, and as soon as that starts to drift, we should correct. And the obesity and the diabetes would never get a toehold in the first place. So again, what I'd really like to fix is everything, but you asked me if I could fix just one thing with these characters. Let's make diet quality a vital sign and let the rest ensue.
Like it.
Thank you. And to learn more about my efforts in that space, people can go to dietid.com.
Great.
We've built the platform that can do it.
We'll put that in the show notes. That is the most exciting thing That is just so, wow. I'm like, whoo, let's just end it with the bomb there. That's incredible. All right. Something to strive for then, for sure, to make that reality,
Yes.
you know?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I hope I live to when I go to the hospital and they ask about that and they are
Me
able to
too.
measure it.
I've taken good care of myself, so I have some hope of living long enough to see this happen. Final thing, I get, we're seem to be in wrap up mode here. Just one thing to make sure we get out there.
Please.
I never hear anybody ask what health is for. My patients over 30 years of clinical care always seem to assume that health was the ultimate goal. So I'd ask my patients, I'm giving we're talking about your health, and why do you come see me? Well, 'cause I want to be healthy. And why do you want to be healthy? Well, why wouldn't I want to be healthy? That extra step, what is health for? I don't think we do a good job in our culture of conveying the true value proposition of health. Health, I think, in our culture feels like a moral imperative. You should be healthy. You're a better person if you're healthy. So health seems to always reside at the end of an admonishing finger. I think that's a bad place to put it. Healthy people have more fun.
Yeah, as I say, to live vibrantly.
I don't think we've
fully.
talked nearly enough about that, right? I mean, if you have health, it's the one currency you can spend on doing more of whatever it is you like. You are the boss. Nobody's the boss of you. But all of us want whatever it is we want. And you can have more of whatever the heck that is if you're healthy. And you don't have to trade good health for good food or good food for good health. You can love food that loves you back. And there are resources to help you get there from here. And physical activity is not an, oh, woe is me, I have to exercise. It's the opportunity to engage your native animal vitality. And, if you're thinking, oh, woe is me, imagine if you had a disability that didn't let you get up and do the activities that you like to do, right? You'd sort of feel sorry for yourself. Well, you can. So celebrate that. Yeah, you can count your steps. Sure, no problem. But if all your body parts work and you can do the things you want to do, count your blessings. I mean, just celebrate that. So, there's just so much we get wrong about health. It's the gift that keeps on giving. It empowers you to have more of the life you want to have. And I don't think we talk nearly enough about that.
Yeah, it is. It's a gift. And you can, if you rescue a dog, then you have someone to walk with, and they will make sure you walk them 3 or 4 times a day. So there's that.
I've got dogs because you heard them a little while ago.
And exactly. I mean, yeah. They stare at you until you take them on good walks.
Yeah. Current evidence also present to my left.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah. All right. We're all in that camp.
Thanks.
This has been exceptional. Thank you. Our audience is going to love every second. Learn so much today.
Thank you. Well, it's been a real pleasure to be with you. Appreciate it very much.